I started using Pro Tools nearly 20 years ago. Back then, it was the only DAW capable of delivering a truly professional recording. And I believe that's why Pro Tools is considered the industry standard, because for years, it was the only standard. It's like the Google of search engines. There may be other options, but if it's not broken, why change it? However, after years of using Pro Tools, I started to feel frustrated. I saw newer DAWs introducing innovative features and thought, why can't Pro Tools export stems that easily? Or why can't I drag an entire plugin chain to another track like this one? The limitations became more noticeable over time. Then I tried Studio One and I was hooked. It gave me everything Pro Tools did, but better. It had all the modern features of newer DAWs while maintaining the fluid workflow I loved from Pro Tools. And for those of you who have been following the channel for a while and wondering why, after first switching to Studio One, I went back to Pro Tools for a bit, I'll explain in the end. Let's go. All right, so the first thing that drew me into Studio One was the fact that I could drag full chains of inserts and full chains, I guess you call it, of sends to another channel or multiple channels. So check it out. On the left, we have Studio One. And you'll notice on this track, I have Pro Q and Pro C2. Now this is a small chain. Sometimes you could have 5, 6 plugins, right? If I want to move these over to this track, all I got to do is wait for the hand over the insert and drag over, and boom, they all drag over. Same goes for sends. Once the hand is there, I can drag all the sends over. And I can even select multiple tracks and drag them over. So like, for instance, if I undo that, another feature we'll talk about soon. But say we have these 2 tracks and I want these to go on both of these. I can just drag over once they're selected and boom, the EQ and compressor are on both of these tracks. And that could be 10 tracks, doesn't matter. You can do the same with sends, drag these both over to all of them. And even if I already have a send on this track, it will copy those over but still leave that send. Now in Pro Tools, in order to do that, I have to option click and drag one plugin at a time. I can't drag full inserts over. Same with the sends. I have to drag them all one at a time. And if you have like 8 tracks to do this, it's very cumbersome. It's a pain in the you-know-what, and it takes forever. So this is one of the first things that Studio One did that Pro Tools couldn't, that blew my mind. Now on to number 2, but sticking with sends and returns, is how much faster and more creative and intuitive you can create sends and returns in Studio One. Now, you can do it both ways in Pro Tools and Studio One. You can go and hit add effects or bus. They have 2 different things. In Studio One, we'll stick with bus to keep it the same as Pro Tools. And you add a bus and it will create a new track. And then you can go to this new track and add the plugin you want and then send it to it. Same in Pro Tools. You can go to the sends and go new track and name what you wanted. This is going to be aux, otherwise known as a bus. Hit create and it will create it, and then you can put your effect there. So those work the same, but in Studio One, the browser window, you can do it much faster. So you click open browser and pick any plugin you want. Say we want this reverb chamber, right? All you gotta do is drag it over to the send you want to put it on, and boom, it creates a send. Let's move the browser and the effects track, right? With the plugin on it, and you're ready to go. Like nothing else has to happen. And another feature that I think is huge is the fact that if you have a send, you can double click on it and it brings up the plugin that it corresponds to. Whereas in Pro Tools, if we have, say, a reverb here, let's just throw an R-verb on here really quick. And then we want, here's the aux for it, right? Well, that's fine. That's the aux, that's just the send. But if I want to change any settings to that, I have to go to the aux and then open the plugin. Now, for a small session like that, doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you're working with a session that's 90 tracks and a whole bunch of auxes, trying to scroll through and find where aux 1 is can be not only a pain in the butt, but time consuming, and also just kill all the creative vibe you're working on. Here, I just double click, boom, make the change I want to make, and then you double click it again and it closes it. You're done. On to number 3, one of the great features in Pro Tools is Audio Suite. You can take any plugin you want and just select part of a track and process just that track, right? Now, this is a destructive thing. Once I process it, there's really no undo. It's processed. You can always drag the audio file back in and put it back in that way, but that's a pain in the butt. Once you do something with Audio Suite, it's kind of done. Studio One has the same thing, except they call it event effects. And to me, it works quite a bit better. I can select this track, right? And say I want to EQ it differently. You just pull up your event effects section and hit enable, and then you can insert anything you want on it. It's also quite a bit faster. We click here and I can search, say I want a Fab Filter Pro Q3 or Pro Q4 now, and say we just want to filter this thing out, right? We can do it and it's done. That's already filtered out and changed. Now, I can leave that or I can render it, and now it's rendered. It's part of the file now. But say I send this off and the client doesn't like it and they want to undo it. Well, with Event Effects, you can restore it and then pull the filter back or whatever is needed, and then render it again if you want. And you always have access to be able to undo things. If I was to do that in Pro Tools, one, it takes a lot longer. I got to go to Audio Suite. I have to find Fab Filter because you can't search. There it is, Pro Q4. Then I go and do the thing. I can't listen to it in real time unless I hit play here. And then once it's done, I hit render. And that's it. It's all done. I can't really do anything about it after that. So the ability to undo things and make changes much quicker in Event Effects versus Audio Suite is huge to me. And the other thing in Studio One is if this is something you really are committed to and there's no reason you're going to change it and you don't want to have Event Effects on and restore it, you can actually just bounce the selection really quick. Just select the file, go to Events, and go to Bounce Selection, and now it's part of the file. You'll notice that Event Effects is gone, and if you want to add new Event Effects to this file, you can do that too. So to me, Event Effects is a much more streamlined version of Audio Suite with a lot of options to undo, which you don't have with Audio Suite. The next one, which was a big one for me, was exporting stems. With Dolby Atmos now, everyone needs stems. People need stems for shows. A lot of times you finish a mix and you need to export stems, or if you're a producer or so forth, you need to be able to export stems and send them to a mixer or whatnot. Studio One, very simple. I go to Song and I go to Export Stems. And I can either do it by channel or tracks. The difference is really, it will either process through the buses or will give you the tracks and the separate buses that you have. And all you do is name it, sample rate, hit OK, and boom, all the stems start exporting. You go get a cup of coffee. Pro Tools, there is no stem export. You can go one by one and solo it and bounce each track, which could take forever. With the advent of this program called SoundFlow, they have scripts that you can implement to bounce all the stems, and that has been a huge help. I use SoundFlow all the time. I'll put a link to a video that I created about SoundFlow, and that has made Pro Tools a lot more like Studio One, but that is another $10 charge a month to use SoundFlow. So you have to pay a fee, basically, in order to export stems just like in Studio One. So I don't know how that weighs out. I also just think even with the SoundFlow scripts, Studio One's is just built into the system and there's a lot less room for error. Sometimes with the scripts, it will just do something weird and you don't get the stems exported the way they're supposed to. Studio One, I export the stems. I barely ever have to check them because I know they are correct. So another win for Studio One when it comes to exporting, and one of the biggest ones for me. Next, I want to talk about groups, and this might be kind of small or trivial, but in day-to-day practice, I find this to be a huge thing that I miss when I'm switching back and forth because I still do have to mix in Pro Tools quite often. But for instance, if I have these 3 tracks, and say these are 3 background tracks that are panned left, right, in the middle, and I just want to turn them all down an equal amount, I can select all 3 of these just by shift-clicking and turn all these down 9 dB or whatever I want to turn them down. I could also group them just like in Pro Tools and do it that way. But in Pro Tools, I can't do that. I can't select all 3 of these and then turn all 3 down. Just that one will be turned down. I have to actually, Command G, create a group, BG Vox, and then click OK, and then turn those down. And the part I don't like about that is now I'm locked in. So in order to just turn up that single vocal, now I have to go over to the side, turn off the group, turn up the middle vocal, for instance, and it's just a process. It's something that I wish I didn't have to do. Now, in Studio One, I can turn these all up or down, and then I can unselect everything and then just turn up the middle one, 3 dB, because the middle vocal needs to be louder. And it's not locked into a group. It's a one-time change that I'm making, and I don't need to create a whole group just to do that. And as I said, I think that's kind of trivial, but in day-to-day practice, that becomes a very huge thing for me. Next I want to talk about is macros. What macros are taking something that would take 4 or 5 different moves and creating it in a list, and then you hit one button and it does it all. For instance, if I wanted to take this track, duplicate it, and pull this part and create a reverse reverb just on this section, well, I have these macros here where I can hit reverse reverb, and it will reverse the file, create the reverse reverb, and it's done for me, ready to go, done. You just don't have that in Pro Tools. Now, I will say, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, there is this new thing called SoundFlow, which works with Pro Tools. It has nothing to do with Avid or Pro Tools, but for a lot of people, myself included, it was a big game changer when using Pro Tools. You can create all these kinds of macros, almost more in-depth than you can with just the built-in Studio One. However, my findings back and forth have been the same macros I was using in Pro Tools, I can create in Studio One using this macro thing. And like I said before, it's not an extra fee. The macros make a lot of small steps a lot easier. Things that are redundant, they have to do over and over again. You can hit one button and it will do it all. SoundFlow does that too, but it's not built into Pro Tools. So it's another win for Studio One is the macros and all the abilities you have to be able to do things like that. Here's another small one that is a huge difference to me, and that is the ability to undo in Studio One. Let me show you. Let's say I put on this plugin, whatever this plugin is. It's probably going to take, it's this reverb, and I say, oh, I didn't mean that reverb, I meant the other reverb. All I have to do is go Apple Z, and it takes the reverb off. Let's say I created a whole send. Oh, I didn't want to create that send. Apple Z, undo. Volume change. This one actually Pro Tools does do, but you can undo here. Anything you do, EQ moves, all of that, you can undo in Studio One. Pro Tools, the only thing I can undo is this, is a level change. I can't add a plugin and then say, oh, I didn't mean to add that plugin, hit Apple Z. Nothing happens. I just have to close the plugin now, go there, no insert, 3 or 4 steps. Like I say, it's small, but doing that over and over again, I make a lot of mistakes. It's a big deal. You know, sometimes you'll do something in Pro Tools that's just detrimental to what you were working on, and you just can't undo it. Studio One, you make a mistake, and you're like, oh man, I did not mean to clear out that whole vocal chain with that one plugin by mistake, which has happened before. You do that in Pro Tools and you're done. You do that in Studio One, just hit undo. So the ability to use undo in Studio One compared to Pro Tools is just miles ahead. I don't know why Pro Tools hasn't implemented more undo, but that's just the way it is, and I will take Studio One's undo over Pro Tools any day of the week. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is Dolby Atmos. Now, Pro Tools is the industry standard and what a lot of people use to create Dolby Atmos mixes. But in order to do it, you need a separate software, much like SoundFlow. You need the Dolby Atmos renderer. And then you have to configure it with Pro Tools and make sure it's all talking to each other and working well. It is a bit of a process to do. If you want to make a Dolby Atmos mix in Studio One, it is all built in. They're actually the first DAW to natively have the Dolby Atmos system all built into the DAW. And so much so that you can export the final render out of Studio One. So like I said, you don't have to leave Studio One at all to do a Dolby mix. Whereas in Pro Tools, you have to export the final render out of the renderer, which is a big process. And I've done Dolby Atmos mixes in both, and it's like so much quicker to do it in Studio One, which also keeps you creative. And so if you're looking to get into Dolby Atmos, I highly suggest looking into Studio One before you pick Pro Tools. All right, guys, so those are the reasons I think Studio One is a better DAW than Pro Tools. Now, in the beginning of the video, I mentioned, and some of you that have been watching my channel for a while might know, I was a Pro Tools guy, went to Studio One, and then went back to Pro Tools, and here I am back to Studio One. Now, there is a reason for all this. Around Studio One 5.5, some strange things started happening with third-party plugins, and I was getting a lot of crashes, and I use quite a few third-party plugins. I have a pretty fast workflow. I mix quite a few songs every week, and I couldn't work like that with things crashing all the time. Sometimes I would have to spend 45 minutes troubleshooting why a certain plugin wasn't showing up on a mix I had to do a revision for. And that was just slowly became really hard to get things done. And I need something that is stable and always working well. So as much as I didn't want to, I went back to Pro Tools. And like I talked about in the video, they had SoundFlow, which made it a bit easier to do a lot of the things I was able to do in Studio One that I couldn't do in Pro Tools previously. Still was frustrated with Pro Tools though. I like using Console One and controllers and all that. And Pro Tools it's getting better, but doesn't play that well with all those different controllers. So when Studio One 7 came out, I gave it a run again to see if they'd worked out all the bugs, and they had. Everything's working very well in Studio One now, and I felt confident enough to be able to switch back to Studio One. I've been using Studio One full time again for probably 6 months now, and I've had no issues with third-party plugins crashing or anything like that. So whatever the problem was before, it seems to be now be fixed, and I am forever grateful for it. All right, so that's the end of the video. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think Pro Tools or Studio One is a better DAW? Love to get your thoughts. And as always, if you need your songs mixed or mastered, hit me up at mixandmastermysong.com. You can also find my courses and presets there too. Talk to you guys soon.